Morning.
Okay.
And are we good at Stace? I have it that it's live. Great.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our program approval process work group. I think we've had some good interactions already, and hoping we can do the same thing this morning. We're going to start out with Michelle Lambert, kind of taking the first part of this. Michelle, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Madam Chair and members of the work group. My name is Michelle Lambert, and I'm a policy analyst at the Department of Legislative Services. I was asked to start the meeting with a quick overview of the charge of the work group. So, Carol, if you could put those slides up, that would be helpful. Awesome. So this work group was created in the budget bill of last session to make recommendations on a number of things. So if you can go to the next slide. The work group must submit a report by December 1st and shall include recommendations on whether MPEC shall, 1, develop operational missions to differentiate each institution's role in meeting the state's goals, 2, develop 3-year institutional plans to help facilitate efficient coordination of academic degree program offerings, 3, develop mechanisms to ensure that objective data demonstrates that proposed programs support state workforce needs and the economic competitiveness of the state, and that MPEC has sufficient data and analytics staff to evaluate these objectives. 4, develop measurable criteria to determine whether a proposed new program is considered unreasonable or unnecessarily duplicative. 5, make any revisions to the objection process, including any statutory changes. 6, make any recommendations or any revisions of the criteria that trigger a full program review. 7, given projected enrollment declines, make any revisions to the program approval process to encourage collaboration among institutions. And 8, make any revisions to ensure that the program approval process has the primary goal of meeting the needs of the state while ensuring full compliance with all applicable laws and legal precedents regarding program approval with respect to the historically Black colleges and universities. Again, as a work group, you can decide in your report not to recommend that MPEC do any of these things, but the report does need to touch on each of these 8 provisions. And as a reminder for the members of the work group and for the members of the public, that $500,000 was withheld from MPEC, USM, Morgan State University, St. Mary's College of Maryland, funding from the CAID formula for community colleges, and funding from the Selinger formula for the aid to non-public institutions of higher ed, pending submission of this report. Because this work group is in the budget bill, it's only effective for this year and for this purpose. So understanding the charge of the work group, the chairs asked staff to develop a work plan for the 4 to 5 meetings that the work group has ahead of you. And what we proposed and what was accepted by the chairs, so that we're all on the same page, was to organize the meetings into 4 themes based on these 8 charges before you. And those themes are going to be mission statements, 2, workforce development and needs, 3, a discussion around collaboration, and 4, the program approval process recommendations. So you can go to the next slide, Carol. For reference, highlighted are the 2 charges related to mission statements for the work group to consider when listening to today's presentations. And they are on whether the work group wants to make recommendations that MPEC develop operational missions to differentiate each role or develop 3-year institutional plans. For reference, the structure of today's meeting and moving forward at the request of the chair and following meetings will be to 1, discuss the current framework or requirements related to the topic that you guys are going through. So for example, today MPEC will be discussing the current statutory and regulatory requirements for institutional mission statements. Then each meeting will discuss the NCHEM recommendations related to the topic that you guys have before you. This is not to endorse a recommendation by NCHEMS, but because Chapter 41 and 42 of 2021, the Speaker and Senator Sidnor's bill regarding the HBCU lawsuit required DLS to hire a consultant to study the current processes and practices, it felt important to give you all these recommendations as options to consider. And then each presentation that we do as a work group will do an analysis of what other states do, and if there are any similarities or differences or common themes among states. At the last meeting, it was discussed that it'd be helpful to hear what other states do in having this discussion. So the chairs approved a list of 16 states, which you received a matrix on and is on the DLS website, and those are the states that we will be using moving forward. The states are a list of the states that MCHEMS used on their report, which they considered similar to Maryland. They're states that DLS uses as competitor states, which is a term of art that we use in the budget analyses. And the chairs added 2 additional states, Delaware and Missouri, because they also have only public HBCUs, and they felt that was important to add those. So with that, I'm happy to take any question regarding the work group's charge or the structure of the work today or moving forward. But if there are no questions, I will turn it over to my colleague, Emily Dow.
Do we have any questions or comments on this part before we move on? Okay, Michelle, you covered it all.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, so now we'll move on to Dr. Emily Dow, Assistant Secretary, Academic Affairs, for a presentation on Maryland Higher Education Commission use of institution mission statements.
Great. Thank you, Senator King and work group members and Delegate Smith. I can't remember who is showing the slide deck, but if you could pull up the slide deck, that would be great. Please and thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Next slide. We'll get right into it. Per statute, we are expected to go through a mission review every 4 years after the review of the state plan for higher education. This process applies to both our public institutions as well as our regional higher education centers. So for clarification, that includes our community colleges, our public 4-year institutions, and all of the regional higher education centers, including the ones under University System of Maryland. Next slide, please. This is a very simple process that is currently outlined in statute. The president of each public institution or the regional higher ed center is responsible for developing a mission statement. The president or executive director of the regional higher ed center is supposed to submit it to their governing board. And then the governing board is supposed to review that mission statement, may require the preparation of a revised mission statement. The governing board is expected to adopt the mission statement, and then the governing board is expected to submit that statement to the commission. Next slide, please. USM, per statute, the University System of Maryland has some additional tasks or to-dos when it comes to the mission review. The chancellor is supposed to review the mission statement prior to the consideration of the Board of Regents. And before adopting the mission statements, the Board of Regents are supposed to review the statement and assure 2 things. One, that they are consistent with the charter and the system-wide USM plan, and that the missions will promote the efficient and effective use of the institutions and systems resources. So Board of Regents have a little bit of an additional to do when it comes to approving and submitting mission statements to the commission. Next slide, please. Then once it comes to the commission is to review the mission statements to determine whether the mission statement is in fact consistent with the state plan. If the commission finds that the statement is not consistent, then we're expected to return that statement together with its objections and potential revisions. And then the governing board and the institution are supposed to negotiate with the commission and amend the statement or prepare a new statement. And that's supposed to happen pretty quickly after this review of the state plan every 4 years. Next slide, please. There are some statutory distinctions among our public institutions. So I wanted to highlight that for the work group because these statutory distinctions often help inform mission statements and how an institution has an identity and the curriculum that they offer. So the community colleges have 7 unique purposes across the state. They are supposed to provide a diverse range of educational services with particular emphasis on community-centered programs. They are also, by statute, identified as essentially open access institutions, so that anyone with with a variety of educational backgrounds can enroll at a community college. They're expected to provide core curriculum of general education. They're expected to provide lower level undergraduate courses and follow transfer requirements. They're expected to provide technical and career education programs, training in skills and fields of this study importance to the region, business community. So again, serving their local community. Continuing education programs to benefit citizens of the community, provide developmental and remedial education, and provide public services to the community citizens. So they really truly are community colleges serving their community and their immediate region. Next slide. In contrast, our public four-year institutions often have statutory identifiers, and so let me run through these rather quickly, but we can certainly discuss them. Morgan State University is designated as the state's preeminent public urban research university with a mission of instruction, research, and service. This comes straight from the statute. There's an emphasis on education addressing urban concerns, and Morgan has the responsibility with other educational institutions for providing higher education research and graduate study in the Baltimore area. Next slide, please. St. Mary's is designated as the Public Honors College located in St. Mary's County. They are expected to have an overall plan that enhances its role as a traditional liberal arts college. So we'll explain what that means in contrast. Affirms the needs for increased access for economically disadvantaged and minority students. Ensures that access to the college by state residents is not diminished because of increases in tuition and other fees by the college designation as a public honors college. Again, re-emphasis on a public honors college. Encourages and supports high quality undergraduate programs and stimulates outreach in the community and the state through close relationships with public elementary and secondary schools, business and industry, and governmental agencies. Additionally, statute describes St. Mary's as an important element for the historical purposes of historic St. Mary's City as a living monument to the legacy of Maryland's first colonial capital. Next slide, please. Towson University, by statute, USM, University System Maryland, is again supposed to have an overall plan, and that plan is to support Towson as the largest comprehensive institution. Next slide, please. University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. The General Assembly has given UMC's, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, to award graduate degrees specifically in marine and environmental sciences jointly with another public senior institution, and award post-baccalaureate certificates. So they have a very specific purpose. Next slide, please. University of Maryland Eastern Shore, UMES, University System of Maryland, and their overall plan is supposed to enhance the historically African-American institutions and recognize the role of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore as the state's 1890 land grant institution. Next slide, please. University of Maryland Global Campus has additional unique identifiers. UMGC is intended to operate as Maryland's open university, serving non-traditional students who reside in Maryland, the United States, and throughout the world. So truly that global mission. Provide the citizens of Maryland with affordable open access higher education, so identified as an open access institution, and continue as a leader in distributed higher education. The University System of Maryland plan is supposed to incorporate the priority that recognizes and promotes the unique potential of UMGC to be the national and global leader in new international marketplace of electronic and continuing education. Next slide, please. University of Maryland is supposed to be a strategic partnership between University of Maryland Baltimore and University of Maryland College Park. The University System of Maryland overall plan is supposed to incorporate the following priority, which is to maintain and enhance an academic health center, so again, specific in terms of field, health center, and a coordinated higher education center for research and graduate professional studies in the Baltimore area, comprised of UMB and UMBC with a focus on science and technology. So very, again, specific fields and specific types of study at the graduate level. Next slide, please. University of Maryland, Baltimore County is just reiterated here that the UMBC and UMB are supposed to be working together with a focus on science and technology as a higher education center for research and graduate professional studies in the Baltimore area. So really the purpose of serving the Baltimore community. Next slide, please. University of Maryland, College Park. The University System of Maryland is supposed to enhance the mission of College Park as the state's flagship campus, with programs and faculty nationally and internationally recognized for excellence in research and the advancement of knowledge. Also unique to College Park is an agreement with Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University around a veterinary medical program. And last, University of Maryland College Park is supposed to have level of operating funding and facilities necessary to place it among the upper echelon of its peer institutions. So those are some highlights of statutory designations for our colleges and universities in Maryland. These statutory designations help the agency better understand institutional roles and responsibilities as well as their identities. And I will stop there. That's the end of the slides that I had prepared for background purposes. Happy to answer questions or turn the time over to the next presenter.
Thank you. Pace McConkey.
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation. And I just have a quick question, because as you identified under the current statute, these mission statements are approved by MHEC if they are consistent with the state's plan for higher education. So what are the statutory requirements for the state plan for higher education?
Sure. So I cannot rattle them off the top of my head, but the state plan has very specific requirements. It's supposed to identify workforce need. It's supposed to identify goals, both short-term and long-term, that meet the state's requirements or the state's need economically to advance the state. There's, I believe, 4 criteria, and I could pull them up real quick. I just don't have them at the ready.
No, that's helpful, and you can provide them to us anytime.
Will do. Thank you. If it's okay, I can put it in the chat as soon as we move on to the next topic.
Okay. Delegate Harris.
Appreciate it, Madam Chair. So I just have a few quick questions. So how often do you review the mission statements, and is it done for each update of the state plan, or is it ever done more frequently?
So the last time we did a mission statement review was in 2018. We revised the state plan in 2022 and released that. At the same time, we knew that NCHEMS was reviewing and potentially making recommendations. So we have not, at this point, proceeded on another mission statement review process, knowing that there were some pending recommendations around mission statements and institutional identity. So in short, the last time a mission statement review was completed was in 2018, and it's we haven't proceeded because we are waiting for additional recommendations on how the agency should proceed.
Okay, appreciate it. So we're talking about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to kind of follow up from, I know we're a little out of rhythm based on your answer, because we're awaiting guidance, but just traditionally, what's like the outcome or the accountability for either the institution not providing, updated language around their mission, and what would be the fallout if MHEC did not do its part of, reviewing and making a decision on that? Like what are the safeguards that this review would actually ever happen outside, of course, this current, delay?
Sure. So the agency would proceed with a review. There's no reason, I mean, outside of our current context, we were prepared to do that. It does, and I think I think the conversation is moving in this direction. What exactly should be included in a mission statement is sometimes the challenge. We have institutions that have 3-word mission statements, which is in some ways fine, because then we look at their strategic plan, we'll look at their vision statement, we'll look at other metrics to say, is this aligned with the state plan and where the agency sees higher education going. So the last time we did the mission review, we asked for strategic plans in addition to both mission and vision statements to help us better understand institutional identity and where the institution is going forward.
And I just want to, Madam Chair, just want to follow up very briefly, if that's okay. And so the overlay would be the statutory language on top of whatever. And then you kind of look at that in concert and then consult the mission statement, the strategic plan or other, documents if need be. Okay, just want to get a sense of how that works. Thank you.
Senator Watson.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Emily, for the presentation. Just one question on that last slide. And if I jotted it down before you transition, operational funding to place it in the upper echelon of its peers. That was referring to the goal of the University System of Maryland for College Park. Was that what that was?
So that comes from just general language around expectations to support College Park. It is not specific to the USM overall plan. It is a part of statute that is describing College Park and our public institutions and funding practices. And it is arguing or stating the fact that College Park should get funding appropriate so that it can remain competitive nationally.
And that is in statute?
Correct. Everything on the slides that I just showed you is direct from statute.
But there's nothing else in statute related to any other college or university that explicitly calls out funding at a specific level.
I would not be, I'm sure there are other statutory requirements around funding mechanisms and requirements. The reason to pull that one out is it is tied to institutional identity, that funding should ensure that College Park is competitive with its peer institutions.
So what's the nearest peer institution to College Park?
That is a good question, and I am not prepared to answer that in terms of I am not well versed on funding mechanisms and funding calculations. I would have to ask my colleague at the agency to provide additional detail. I apologize, I do not have the answer to that.
Yeah, can you follow up on that? Because that statement just implies that they're going to get a certain level of funding, and I don't see that with respect to any of the other institutions. And in addition, I'd like to know what would be a peer of Morgan State or University of Maryland Eastern Shore? Thank you.
Absolutely, I can work to find that information for you, Senator.
Okay, Matt Power.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Emily, your presentation obviously did not include a lot as it related to the independent sector. So just for the good of the group, I was hoping you could clarify MHEC's role as it relates to mission statements for private institutions.
Absolutely, yep. So MHEC's role for mission statement and mission statement approval is only for our public institutions. It does not include any of the private independent institutions, even those that receive Selinger funding or any of the other private institutions that operate here in Maryland. So our review is limited in the sense that it is only for public entities, including regional higher ed centers.
Okay. Delegate Smith.
Yes, just one last question. Dr. Dowd, my last question is, I saw on the presentation, you noted that, for example, the strategic relationship between College Park and Virginia Tech as it pertains to the veterinarian program. I believe that date was 1989. It was like the origin of that partnership. It would be interesting, at least to me, to get a sense when those other statutory distinctions for institutions, like what year were they established? So we can get a sense of the chronology of those statutory distinctions.
Me too. I can certainly work with RAG to make sure I get that accurate, and can revise the slides and provide dates of when those provisions or descriptions were added. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Dr. Rye, did you have any comments you wanted to make this morning?
No, thank you. We are looking forward, making progress on this very important issue, and MHEC is ready to implement the new process. We are really excited about it. In terms of the agreement with Virginia Tech, Delegate Smith, that agreement exists because the state of Maryland, as of now, does not have a veterinary science program. And, so that's the reason, but, maybe one day we will have our own program, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the presentation on National Center for Housing Management recommendations on institution mission statements. Stacy Goodman and Michelle Lambert.
Stacy, you're on mute. And also it should be higher education. That was a typo in the agenda.
Yes. Good morning. I'm Stacy Goodman. I'm a policy analyst with the Department of Legislative Services. And so my part of this presentation will be a review of the National Center for the Higher Education Management Systems report and their recommendation on mission statements. So Carol, if you want to put up that part of the presentation, please. Next slide. So we're just going to start here with the general recommendation from NCHEMS. And I should just note to you that Sally Johnstones from the organization is present today. So if you have questions about their recommendation, I'm sure she would be pleased to answer those questions because she is best suited for that task. So again, NCHEMS recommends in general that MHEC's authority to approve mission statements needs to be clarified. And it has suggested a more coherent and strategic approach to this would be for MHEC to approve operational missions versus the current mission statements. Next slide, please. So this slide goes into a little bit more detail about the distinctions between what an operational mission statement would be and a mission statement is now. So current mission statements, according to NCHEMS, are described usually a short statement of lofty aspirations and shared values that serve to unite and inspire, but don't have a great deal of detail. Many institutions link to them on their website. I went and took a stroll through the public institutions here in Maryland, and they were quite easy to find. And they are generally just that, about 3 or 4 short sentences that describe kind of the aspirational aspect of where the mission is, where the institution is going. However, NCHEMS differentiates an operational mission statement as giving voice to the strategic roles an institution plays in what it calls the complex post-secondary ecosystem. They would express the institution's various array of programs, the audience the institution serves, any other services and special features, such as the institution's status as a historically Black institution, or as a flagship institution in the case of University of Maryland College Park. The goal would be to provide more meaning for MHEC to design when it implements its program review and approval functions. They suggest that MHEC's role should be as follows if the work group were to adopt its suggestion to use operational mission statements. MHEC would have a goal of developing tight and measurable operation mission statements for all public institutions that would increase the diversity at the HBCUs and include equity gap reductions. and they can be used to assess appropriateness of new programs. Essentially, if a new program were to be proposed by an institution, if it theoretically fit within the operational mission, then it would be much clearer to MHEC that this program should be approved versus having to go through a whole process. They would review the proposed programs, should start with a determination of adherence to their operational mission. And if it's within that, as I just said, the approval would be automatic instead of having to go through the lengthy process. MHEC should invite the private institutions to use the same mission statement template as adopted by the public institutions. And MHEC would be required 3-year plans from institutions and review those on an ongoing basis. They've also noted in their report that the language used to advertise by the institution on their website could be whatever it was, as long as it was not inconsistent with the approved operational mission statement. Next slide, please. So the next natural question is, what do other states do? Do they all have mission statements, or how do they handle operational mission statements? So as Michelle described at the beginning of this meeting, there are 17 other states that we are comparing the state of Maryland to. And in your meeting materials was a matrix that was sent to you that has some information about each of these 17 states. These states were chosen partly because NCHEMS had a group of states in their report, as they had described that they were subject to the US v. Fortis decision, and they all have HBCUs. And the other states are what we can call the competitor states with Maryland and the additional states that Michelle described. So we want to thank the Education Commission of the States. They also provided some information for that matrix and for this information that we have. As you can see, this slide highlights several important pieces of information from each of those states, and we've grouped them into 3 categories: approval for mission statements, standards for mission statements, and the timeline. So with regard to approval, what we mean is, does an outside entity have to approve the institution's mission statement, or is this one they just develop on their own? And what are the required components? So for 9 states, they require approval of a higher education coordinating agency. And as you'll see, each of those statements is listed by the states that have that requirement. Not every state has a higher education coordinating agency. So if they don't require it, it's generally because they don't exist. 2 states require legislative approval of the mission statement after approval of the coordinating agency. Louisiana and Virginia are 2 of those states. Several states don't require any approval whatsoever. Those states each institution develops their own mission statement, and that's sufficient in that state for the purposes of describing what that institution does. And we also said that 5 states view it as within the institution's own autonomy. Moving on to standards. Standards are more detailed requirements. What do states require in a mission statement? Where is the requirement that the institution develop a mission statement? Some of them are in statute and some of them are regulatory requirements. So 3 states have the most detailed requirements. For example, they have an intended role within it, the academic and research goals, audience served, the geographic areas that are served by that or hope to be served by that institution. Only 1 state requires submission of a report with their mission statement regarding collaboration with other institutions, and that's Ohio. And most states require that the mission statement be in compliance with the state plan for higher education, similar to what Maryland does. And finally, the timeline in Maryland, as Emily stated, ours is every 4 years. However, there is no common or consistent practice across all states. Some it's undefined, some it's required each year, and it can go from every 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. Also, as you see at the bottom of that slide, are the 17 states that we have compared to. So on the last slide, Michelle is going to talk about some draft recommendations for the work group to consider.
Thanks, Stacy. So next slide, Carol. Thanks. So what you have before you are a number of draft recommendations for discussion of this group related to missions, which again flows from your requirement as a work group. I think we are happy to tweak, eliminate, add pieces, but these are before you to see if there's what discussion you have, if there's any consensus, and to facilitate a conversation. So I'm going to go through them. The first is that the legislature should make a statutory change to require mission statements to include minimum standards. For example, mission statements should comply with the state plan, include details on audiences served, array of programs, services offered, and special features of that institution, if it has a research emphasis, land grant status, minority survey institutions. The legislature should really differentiate that these mission statements are different from the mission statements on an institution's website, for which an institution has complete discretion if the mission statement doesn't conflict with what MHEC has approved as their mission statement. You might, as a work group, want to recommend a different term than mission statement, because as you can tell, it's hard to conflate those two. So you might want to have a different term for what this legislative approval process statement is and what the online mission statement is. The legislature should make statutory changes to require MHEC to approve whether mission statements meet minimum standards. MHEC may not have the authority to approve or disapprove a mission outside of whether the mission meets these minimum standards. It was Chair Smith talked about today accountability metrics. So you might want to add some accountability metrics along this recommendation for whether MHEC completes their review on time and whether an institution complies with MHEC's review of their mission statement. So you might want to tweak that one as well. Third, the legislature should require approval of mission statements every 2 years. But as Stacey talked about, there's no consensus among institutions or among states, and NCHEM's recommended 3 years. I think 2 years was proposed as dovetailing off the St. Mary's presentation from last meeting, and that a program they said typically takes about 2 years, but again, as a work group, you can decide a different amount of time. Mission statements should include potential programs the institution is considering in the next 2-year cycle of mission statements to facilitate discussion between institutions. And mission statements approved by MHEC will be used by MHEC when making program approval determinations and monitoring trends and implementation of the state plan. So we can take questions on these or anything. You can decide not to do these right now, or that you need more time or hold back or facilitate discussion, but we put these before you, Madam Chair, so that you guys can start facilitating something. You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Okay, Matt Power.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have just 2 questions before we get into the meat of the draft recommendations. And the first is, the matrix is very helpful, thank you. But Stacey or Sally, I was wondering if you could answer whether or not the states that approve mission statements also have approval over individual programs. Because I think given the way that we're tying them together, those are 2 very different things. Approving a mission statement is one thing, but approving the programs in addition to the mission statements is a little bit different. So if you don't have that answer, that's fine, and we can follow up. But if you do, I'd love to hear it. And then I have one last question.
So the matrix doesn't cover that because we were differentiating mission statements from program approval. So we can get back to you on that information, but we don't necessarily have that right now.
Okay, and then just one last thought again before the meat of the recommendations. If institutions were drafting operational mission statements really solely for the purpose of the program approval process, how would it not result in everyone sort of including every possibility of things that they might consider doing at some point in the future, particularly if it results in automatic approval of programs that would be consistent with the operational mission? It seems like
I think this question is better for Sally Johnstone because this was their recommendation. So if she is available, I think she's best to answer this.
Thank you.
Sure. You know, what has happened in other states that have really shifted to operational missions is typically they have used a third party to do the research with the institutions, talk with the leaders of the institutions, and create that measurable operational mission for the institutions, from the central point, from the state. Asking each institution to do that, I think, could be fine, but it would require that there be parameters around what needs to be included. Does that help?
Somewhat, thank you. I think probably it would help a lot to know which states approve both missions and the program approval process, individual programs, because that would sort of tie it all together for me. Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Harris.
Appreciate it, Madam Chair. Lambert. So is it possible, could DLS come back with more details, options for minimum standards? For example, we'd like to include the role of HBCUs.
Yeah, we can come back at the next meeting and give you guys examples of minimum standards. I think the idea is not to vote on these recommendations at this point, but to see what your thoughts are and how we can tweak them to better accomplish your intent. So we can definitely do that.
I agree.
Appreciate it.
Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also thank you both to Stacey and Michelle. In light of the prior presentation that kind of summarized the statutory language, and then of course we're discussing here operational missions as distinctly different from kind of the traditional mission that might just be on the website for institutions. It would be helpful if DLS can maybe give us some feedback on how they would distinguish these sets of descriptors. And also, I don't know if operational mission is the phrase you want to use or not, maybe some options around that framing, but I think almost a matrix of Maryland institutions that has the overlay of statutory language and hopefully with the dates that they were adopted, and then maybe mission statements, and then a sense of some of the operational language that might exist, even if it's a link to a strategic plan. I think that would be helpful for us to see how people see themselves, both in statute, internally within their institution, and then within plugging into the larger higher education framework. Because I feel like there's how you see yourself, how you think others see you, and then the statutory. I think it'd be helpful if we could kind of have all of those renderings in one place.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up for you, Madam Chair.
Senator Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sally's response to Matt sounds like a third party would be involved. It to me just sounds like some non-binding arbitration things going on. But there was, you said 5 states had no approval, and New Jersey and Pennsylvania were mentioned there. And I'm just wondering, and you may not have that information now, but how do New Jersey and Pennsylvania handle program duplication? Because it seems that once we or somebody creates these operational mission statements, and then, you know, the challenge is say, for example, offshore wind. Is that environment? Is that mechanical, electrical engineering? You know, what would you characterize that could have such a huge impact to the state of Maryland and everybody who has an inkling of technology under their umbrella would want a piece of that? You know, I just see challenges in trying to carve that out based on a mission statement that might be, you know, 1-2 years old, you know, at the time. And so, you know, you may not have the answer again, but for those states that have no approval process, you know, I'd just be curious to see how their, you know, program duplication, how they, you know, try to mitigate program duplication in those states.
So we can certainly do that. Again, this particular matrix was designed to discuss mission statements, and it was not overlapping with program duplication at this point. But as it seems to be that the consensus of the body is this is very important, so we will take a look at putting them together.
Pace McConkey.
Thank you. First, I just have a quick question with respect to the presentation. I'm trying to define or differentiate operational missions from missions as we know them now. One of the things on your slide said that the operational mission would be based on an institution's array of programs. Maybe someone can address that as compared to the current understanding that programs flow from the mission statements at each institution. Is this a different type of a structure or philosophy where an operational mission would be based on an institution's array of programs? I just need to be informed on that.
So I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we would defer to Sally, since that was in NCHEM's recommendation. If you don't mind, Sally, describing how it's differentiating between what we currently have.
Sure. I'm listening and trying to piece out some things. But in terms of a philosophy, I'm not sure that mission statements per se, in reality, drive program development. Program development at most colleges and universities are based on what you've got in place in terms of resources. And by that, I mean labs and experts, etc., and where the field may be going and what students want for the future. So it's not that mission statements are driving program development or that programs in place would drive a mission statement per se, but it does give each institution the opportunity to differentiate itself. And in the context of the state of Maryland, where you have statutory requirements for program approval through MHEC, there needs to be a way in which MHEC can do that much less arbitrarily and much less confrontationally than is the case right now. Hence our recommendation. I hope that's helpful.
Can I continue with that? Madam
Sure,
Chair?
go ahead. And then I'll take Dr. Pines.
Yes, I was just, I think referencing mainly under a current structure that if a program is proposed by an institution, it must be consistent with the existing mission statement. So in that sense, the mission statements govern what type of programs are proposed and approved. And I was just inquiring as to whether or not a definition of an operational mission would be different from that. And this is something for us, I think, to discuss as a group as we go forward. But of course, your answers are always helpful. Thank you.
Dr. Pines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to weigh in on this discussion a little bit. I kind of agree with Dr. McConkey. There's this sort of imbalance between operational mission and university mission. But I think, most of our mission statements are kind of written fairly broadly and to the audiences that we represent. And so per this discussion, I do believe what happens in each of the core disciplines is that it's really determined by the marketplace and what faculty want to do. And I'll give an example, from my own engineering background when I was Dean of Engineering. So the marketplace in engineering over the last 5 years has moved towards several areas, and I'll just give one, which is autonomy and robotics. And now you see the emergence of undergraduate robotic programs and masters of robotics programs across the United States. That language may not be written in a core university mission statement, but it was determined by the marketplace and by the faculty of that unit that decided that that's an area that they wanted to offer their undergraduates or graduate students. So I'm just sort of concerned that the mission statement is a minimal gate or filter to programs, and that we shouldn't put this much emphasis on it. It's really something that's where the marketplace is moving, and also what is dictated by faculty who have expertise to deliver those subjects. So.
Okay, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like we're hearing at least some level of consensus that people might have some concern about the weight the missions operational, whatever, you know, the designation, the moniker is, as it would impact program, you know, duplication or program approval rather, considerations moving forward. So I would propose perhaps we maybe like, you know, table this discussion and maybe see where there's parts of this discussion that we have more synergy, because that's what I'm sensing is that people are concerned that the operational missions could be pretty much a filter for their program approval. So maybe we should be discussing just the merit of having a mission at all. Is that what I'm hearing? I just want to make sure I feel like I'm hearing what the collective is raising up.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dr. McConkey?
Yeah, I appreciate all of these comments. Very helpful in our understanding moving forward. And I would propose that in the course of these discussions that we have as a work group, that we learn from each other and talk among each other about how this ties into a system of higher education that is complementary as opposed to duplicative, because I think that should be addressed in terms of missions and programs. So is it in our interest as a work group to make recommendations that further strengthen or establish a system of higher education that is complementary in missions as opposed to duplicative in missions, that would result in mission statements or operational missions that are distinct and clearly defined, and then from there, to what extent they may have a role in programs offered by each of those institutions. If missions are distinct, clearly defined in a complementary system, how will that help us ensure that programs are also fulfilling that same objective? So I'm just throwing that out as something that I think should be part of this discussion. Mm-hmm. And while the MCHEM recommendations are helpful, they should be in a sense informative of our process. They don't necessarily have to dictate or determine our process, but they certainly are informative of our process. So those are just, I guess, a few ideas I'm throwing out that I would love to hear the thinking of members of this work group with respect to those broader objectives moving forward.
Okay. Matt Power.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond to Co-Chair Smith's question to clarify sort of, I think, my overarching concern, which is if we had operational mission statements to begin with, and then we're tying the process to it, I see the logic there. But if we're developing the operational mission statements in the context of Maryland and program approval, I think what institutions would really be developing are program approval statements that cover all the things that they want to have approved at some point in the near future, as opposed to true operational mission statements. That's my concern. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Okay, Stacy, ideas for moving forward, Michelle, for our next meeting, where we go from here?
Yeah, so I mean, Stacy and I have been taking, and our team have been taking notes on follow-up information. I think the matrix you got on other states, you should view as a living matrix, which we're gonna update based on the conversations today. Based on Chair Smith's comments, we're gonna make a matrix for the Maryland institutions moving forward, and then start tweaking the recommendations about missions to see if they are kind of tailoring more to what you guys are thinking for the next meeting.
Okay.
The next meeting we had planned to talk about the development of a strategic plan and the requirements around that. And again, you'll have the Chair Smith matrix, which will give you, what our state is doing for our institutions and what other states are doing for program approval. So I think it will inform more of your conversation, but we're happy to do something different if you would like that.
Okay. Dr. Jordan, I see you sitting there very quietly this morning. Just wondered if you had any comments to make.
I'm actually taking it all in. There have been aspects of this conversation that I've agreed with, and others I'm still just questioning. This whole thing about operational mission statements, I think it's very important. But when do you put it, and how does this fit in with program development, and to get away from this duplicative versus complementary? So I'm just trying to parse it all out. I think that I missed the first meeting, and so I don't want to jump right into this, but
I'm glad you're here anyway.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. There are elements here that I'm just concerned with, and I have to be able to articulate them in a somewhat neutral way. So I'm pretty certain I'm going to be speaking more the next meeting, but this time I'm just trying to feel my way there. We've even had comments about, how does one distinguish a flagship from other institutions? I think that's really important, because when a school is designated a flagship, that means there's certain expectations with respect to programming and how broad they are and what their impact is going to be. And that is different from other institutions. I mean, that means that someone that says, this is it, but how do you support it, right? So that's just my little piece right now, but I'm sorry I missed the first.
I'm glad you're here anyway. Thank you. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate your comments, Ms. Jordan. This is very complex, so we're all in the same place. Let me just make a quick statement about something I think Pei said, and then what Dr. Pine said. I had been very much contemplating the concept of, complementary. And when Dr. Pine said robotics, he, like I am, an engineer. When you say robotics, there are three components of that. There's electrical, mechanical, computer science, all kind of interwoven, right? And so when we talk programs, typically I associate a program with a specific department within a college or university. I would love to know that if there are complementary programs in other states, what does complementary mean? If there is a desire by the state to go and really, invest resources in robotics, would one college be responsible for the computer science aspect, and then they would rotate to the other college with mechanical? Or does it mean that we will generate the quantitative analysis to figure out which college will take care of all of those skill sets to deal with that one area of robotics? As we move forward, and particularly in science and technology, all of these aspects are, an aggregate of so many other disciplines and so many other programs. I find it, just challenging, just try to wrap my mind around how we would distinguish those things. And so I'd like, if there, in the research of the team that's helping us work through this, if you find that there are other states who really look at complementary programs, I would like a definition of what an example of what a complementary program looks like between two, colleges or universities, so I can help distinguish it in my mind. And again, I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Watson. I think it's in everybody's good interest to try and come up with a solution to this. And I think we have the right people on this team to take a look at it and make that happen. So I'm optimistic, I must say. Dr. Rai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A wonderful conversation today. A lot of learning, and I'm keeping my thoughts to myself here a little bit, trying to be completely neutral. One thing I'll ask, especially in the context of emerging areas of sciences, our idea of being globally competitive. We are looking at more interdisciplinary programs, and that's where the challenge is. If you look at a a program in let's say, biomedical engineering. If you look at those programs across the country, these are emerging disciplines. There's no standard definition. Each are different. Some are more biology based, some are more mechanical engineering based, some are more computer engineering based. So in interdisciplinary programs, and especially in the emerging areas, it becomes different. There's an article, now it's about a decade old. It says mathematics is the new microscope for biology, but only better. So look at the intersection of mathematics and biology, and not only new programs. How do we make sure that every student who graduates out of the institutions from the state of Maryland has some understanding of data science, some understanding of artificial intelligence, because those are the skills of the future. So I think while we do this academic program approval process, we allow for that innovation. We understand how these areas are changing, how academic areas are emerging, and how interdisciplinary aspects of every discipline becomes important. A lot of progress happened in sciences in the last century when chemistry was chemistry and biology was biology, and it was important for advancement of those areas. But now, Nobel Prize for physics goes to a physicist. Sorry, Nobel Prize for biology goes to a physicist, right? So all those things we have to keep in mind as we develop the new program approval process. The other more logistical thing that I'm thinking about, our deadline is December 1st. So I think we have to kind of move backward, make sure that we are ready to provide some recommendations by that deadline. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Quick alibi, Chairman King.
Oh,
quick
go
alibi.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. Because he just got me thinking about some other questions I had. And I'm just going to make a statement. I'd like the team to just consider it because I'd like an answer to it. When I graduated from Morgan State with my undergraduate in electrical engineering, I immediately wanted to go to grad school. Morgan did not have a master's degree program. I had to go to Binghamton, New York to get my master's and ultimately a PhD. Morgan was then subsequently given the authority to have an MEng program, a master's of engineering, not a master's of science. And so when those distinctions are made, I would like to know how those determinations are made. What differentiates a master's of engineering from a master's of science? And because, I think there's some nuances here that, I think it would be good for all of us to really understand, because when we're talking about program duplication, there are some small, tangential ways you can move that may or may not impinge on another college or university. And so somewhere along the line, I really would like to get a better understanding of those nuances. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay. Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership, that of everyone assembled. I think this was a pretty productive conversation, and I definitely look forward to the next meeting when we discuss kind of workforce, because it does thematically seem like a really good next step for our conversation. Because I think, if we want to be frank, higher education isn't just about opening minds. I mean, I like learning for the sake of it, but I think we recognize that students are also consumers, and they're trying to position themselves to be successful economically. And so we want to ensure that while we're opening minds, we're providing opportunities that allow Maryland's students to place themselves in the most competitive economic position possible. And so I'm actually currently visiting different academic and other research centers in Toronto. And it's just another reminder, we're competing with the world. We're not just competing, with Marylanders. And so I just want to thank you all for your time. And I look forward to the next meeting. And thank you again, Madam Chair, for your leadership.
Thank you. So do we have a date for in time for the next meeting?
Yeah, it's October 24th at 10 a.m. and it will be virtual again.
Okay. That sounds good. Does anyone have anything to add here this morning before we adjourn? I think we're good. Thank you all very much.
Good job, Madam Chair.